Welcome everyone to a special edition of the SPS DAOn Hall here on the August the 2nd, year 2024. And I will be joined today by PJ. We're going to have a discussion about validators. I know some people still had some questions about what's going on there. And also, one of the things that we want to get into today is kind of bringing you guys up to speed on modernizing and revamping our DeFi strategy. So, without further ado, welcome PJ. How's it going?
Howdy, howdy. How are you doing, Clay?
Pretty good, pretty good. Just staying busy. It's like it's funny. Like every now and then, like it doesn't happen a lot, but like there'll be like a day where like I won't have anything to do, and I feel like a little lost. But then like usually like most days like today, I get on today and it's like I had somebody pointing out that there was like an issue with like the technical wording for the DAO sponsored proposals. So like I'm working on that. Yesterday I was like working on revamping tournaments a little bit. It's like there's always something to do. So it's like I rarely ever feel like I'm bored with this job, but it's fun.
Hey, so did they call it a down hall or a DAO hall? I
So
was
I
confused. I thought it
so
was DAO hall.
so like if you guys haven't figured out by now, I'm a little bit of a fan of puns. So like like the phrase town hall.
Turbo puns, yeah.
So Splinterlands was doing the town halls, and I was like, well, I'm just gonna do the down halls.
Gotcha, yeah. Sorry, because I heard it a couple different ways and I didn't know how to pronounce it correctly. And yeah, today I think it would be good to go over some validator timeline stuff since it's been a question that I get, probably the most common question that I get. And I do have some slides to present, but unfortunately I didn't tell Clay ahead of time. So I'll have to post the status sheet somewhere for everybody to take a look at. But I figured we could just start there and then we can run into the DeFi stuff since we'll probably spend maybe and hopefully an equal amount of time on both. But does that work for you? I hope it doesn't invade your schedule too much. I know there was a lot that we wanted to cover today.
No, so like I got most of like my I guess like work stuff done earlier. That's kind of like what I do whenever we have these like whenever we have a down hall. Like I just kind of like do it as like an extra part of my day usually.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I mean, I could just jump right into it and just be an easy conversation for us to kick off. But
Yeah,
yeah, are we good to go?
yeah, go
Everything
go
all
go go
green?
go.
Okay,
Bye.
excellent. All right, so there's four things when we're taking on a project that we try to look at. And in those four different items or four different sections, you got to kind of understand why they're broken out the way they are. It's pretty straightforward. So on a project like Validators, the first thing is complexity and integration, right? Many of the updates that are involved in rolling out validators are complex interactions between the system components and basically the testing and the validation that goes along with making sure that everything's running and operating. Another big piece of it is the security and stability. So obviously it's a huge vector for attack, but we have to ensure that the security and stability is pretty much the most paramount key, or the most paramount point, particularly since we're a decentralized and potentially high value environment. I would consider Splinterlands to be an extremely high value environment just because of the amount of information for users, as well as all of the different tokens and assets that are tied to it. I think I was telling somebody the other day we have like 90, and sorry, I should know this off the top of my head, but I think it was like 96 or 98 million NFTs, right? So quite a bit. The third is kind of more along the lines of user experience. And even though Validators is mostly an operational product, the user experience behind it would consist of the overall functionality of getting it initialized, starting it up, making sure that everything runs smoothly, and that whole entire initialization process is actually thoroughly vetted. A big piece of it is if anybody's ever operated nodes on a blockchain, every single day that goes by, the blockchain gets longer and longer and longer. And so in typical like EVMs, or like Ethereum virtual machines, they'll have rollups, which will help you kind of reduce the block size, but you lose a lot of the block history when you do that. We're not doing that in this case. We're just trying to create a quick and available service that allows people to sync blocks really, really fast out of Cloudflare's R2. And then finally, risk mitigation. So each of these phases involves some sort of risk mitigation and risk strategy to prevent any kind of potential issues from escalating. So I'm going to go through, there's quite a few points here, and I'm sorry if they sound a bit redundant. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of these before or are familiar with kind of the context of what needs to happen, but I'm going to flip through. I think there's 15 different points here real quick of pieces and where we're at in the current scope and timeline with Validators. So the first one, and sorry if I'm harping here, and Clay, please feel free to jump in since I know you are the most technical team member we have.
Do you want to do you want to share like the presentation with them so they can go through it while you're talking? Like if you want, you can actually broadcast it in Discord, and the people in Discord will be able to see it. And then like I can share a link later, like with everybody else if you want to do that. Like so if you do want to share it, like they should be able to see.
All right, and just so you know, I didn't have Nate or anybody do designs on here. I threw this together a while back, so please do not judge. Design is not my first and most important skill set, but yeah, usually I have to do a status update for the company or for Matt, for the board, and this is typically how I do it. And so, let me see here. Okay, here we go. And pardon me again, I've got a little bit of a raspy throat this morning. So if you hear me clearing my voice, I apologize. So the first one is the voting and reward pool. This stuff is actually in QA right now. And if you guys understand how the reward pool works, it's basically the incentive mechanism in the whole entire system. So we have to ensure that the validators are properly rewarding their contributors that are running nodes. And then also, this one also requires a multi-deployment test phase. So we deploy like every Tuesday or every other Tuesday now, and we need to make sure that while we're doing these deployments that we can keep the code and sync information from both of these systems cohesively, right? So unfortunately, it's not like something we can just go through and test all the time because we don't want to have to shut down the full system or boot things back up or have any downtime, and it's not something you can really operate inside a QA, and just have all of your testing come from the QA environment. So what we'll do is some side-by-side tests against the actual network, so that way we can compare numbers and make sure themselves have to have some kind of updating broadcast system that allows us to update changes if anything is wrong into all of the decentralized reward system, the validators that are out there. So in this, we have our development phase. Like I said, this is currently in QA, and in our QA phase, we're going to ensure that the accuracy and fairness of the rewards distributions, which is included in testing in various scenarios that usually pop up, so we can identify those issues. The next one is another thing that I've had a lot of feedback on as of late, but it's removing the voucher code. So vouchers are going to be pulled from the existing implementation that we have. This also, it's marked for attention right now. It's something that I believe, will start working on, but it's not currently a part of the product that is being implemented just yet. So we need to be careful as we pull that out, because there could be extraneous bits of code that we pull out. And we just need the quality run through the QA cycle, which should be relatively easy. And then,
okay, PJ, let me jump in for 1 second. Just there's somebody on YouTube that's watching. Just to give you a heads up, like we weren't set up to do a presentation today. I was unaware. So like if you would like to see the presentation, you can jump into Discord. PJ's live streaming it in Discord. And otherwise we will share it later. So like I'm not positive if we're going to share it like in the Discord server, if I can share it on Twitter, but we will share it later. So just for context, that's why you're not necessarily seeing the slide, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and sorry again. I probably should have warned Clay ahead of time. That's my fault. But you feel free to take it out on Clay all you want. I'm sure he's totally
Yeah,
used
yeah,
to it.
it's my fault actually.
All right, so just kind of wrapping up the voucher stuff here. It also has a period of testing that we just make sure that any of the code changes that we make don't affect any of the other functionality in the system, and also run through regression testing. The validator shop, which allows the validators to access and manage inventory assets, right? This is currently in QA. We're not sure how long this is going to take because there's quite a bit involved with this one. So this will be running through its first QA cycle, I believe, next week. And then we have to also ensure that the test and shop functionality in the interface for it is basically locked down and secure. After that, we have the license and reward pool. This is currently in QA as well, which ensures that the licensing mechanisms are all working correctly. Again, this one, we're kind of unsure. We have to run through the QA process to see just how well we did the first go around. And it's probably going to have to go through quite a few different QA cycles as well. And basically verify that all the licenses are handled correctly with the appropriate reward distributions handed out to them. After that is active validator tracking. This is also already in QA, right? This is basically the essential monitoring service for all the validators that ensures the network remains secure and reliable, and that they're all repeating, basically, so that they're all basically coming up with the same checksum on X amount of blocks. And so we just have to figure out where we want that checksum to be and how many blocks we'll validate on to make sure that they're all reporting accurately. And then there's a lot that goes into the testing on this one too, because we're actively tracking other validators, and then we also have to look for anomalies and how to handle any kind of anomalous activity. Behind that, which is also in QA, is the SPS delegation markets. So facilitate the delegation of SPS tokens. And this is really just kind of the primary function for the DAO. So yeah, it's basically making sure that all the delegated SPS is being tracked appropriately. And then this one we have to also do a ton of testing on, but we can do it through validating existing transactions that are currently happening on chain and just make sure that the various delegation scenarios and the market dynamics all check out correctly. Next is actually turning off services. So when we go down, we have our bridging that we typically follow, and sometimes we'll have to stop bridges, or we'll have to basically just block bridges from reporting to different services while we go into testing. We're kind of unsure how that's going to react on a decentralized service. Not that we're like unsure, but we just want to make sure that we understand what kind of issues we can run into if we have services that continue broadcasting after we have some kind of down event, right? And so that kind of requires a pretty extensive amount of testing. And again, the best time for us to do that with a live network is to do it when we're in downtime for deployments, right? So every other Tuesday. This one, we're hoping to have most of this done within a month. It's got about 30 days worth of work still left on it. And in the team, although the team is working on parts of this service, they're more or less focused on finishing up QA products right now, or products that are currently in QA. And then, we also have to do some simulation testing too. So like we'll have to throw in some kinks and some, what happens if 60, 70% of the nodes go down? Do we consider it like a true broadcast, or is there any kind of fallback strategy that we have to have in place? So there's a little bit more work to be done on this one, but they have been working on it. It is part of the next release cycle, hopefully, and we'll have it in QA. Beyond that is the UI and the Steam Monsters API game support. So anything coming from the game into validators, and then anything reporting back from validators back to the game requires probably the most amount of testing, just because we also have new features coming out. And so any of the new features that are getting added have to be considered today for development. And then we have to figure out, as we start to open source code, and as we get to a point where basically we're going to have this like really weird dislocation at some point in the future, where hopefully most of the validators is managed by open source community, and then Steam Monsters is going to be running its changes. So I don't understand why people think it's just an easy break to just have validators run on its own, because it's going to require a heavy amount of understanding what kind of changes need to be made to the game that have to be updated on the validator side, right? So this is probably one of the things that people get confused, but this is why it's important to have team members that are not only familiar with the Steam Monsters code, but also have really good communication and are familiar with the systems that are being changed. And this is going to be something that's going to, well, I'll just tell you right now, this is the hardest part to hand over. It's just such an integral part of the system that we're going to have to be far more proactive on updating validators before anything is released by the game. And it also creates a lot of headaches for us, because if there's certain aspects of the game that we're trying not to, if we're trying to create a hype cycle to it and we have to modify the validators in advance, then it's kind of like getting rid of the surprise, I guess, in a sense. So we're going to have to come up with some clever dynamics to figure out how to do that. And again, it's one of those things where you don't necessarily just want to shoot it out there and hope that it works. There has to be extensive testing that's done on these things. So one of the benefits that we could do, and one of the ways that we've been thinking about solving this, is just forking the validator code and then working on it in a private, on a private branch, and then putting it up for proposal just before things go live. But we'll see. I mean, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Another thing too is actually the experience that comes with validators. I had mentioned this a little bit earlier, and people have kind of harped on it about this $3,000 bill that we pay that they think the DAO is going to have to pay, which is not true. But we set up a R2 instance probably at the first of the year. And R2 is a caching service provided by Cloudflare. And what it allows us to do is basically sync all of the blocks from Hive to R2, and then give a high throughput, high egress service that anybody can pull in order to pull all of the Hive blocks down for their validators, right? Currently, I think the fastest service out there we have is like 1,000 blocks a second. And you've got millions and millions of blocks that have to be synced. So it takes a while. With this service, we're hoping to cut that down substantially. And another question I had repeatedly is, what happens if that service, if something happens to Splinterlands, what happens to the R2 service? Are the validators useless? And the answer is no. They just have to sync it from the old traditional way that we have to do it right now. And it's just going to take a little longer, right? So it's one of those things that we know.
PJ, like hypothetically though, like as part of the GitHub, we could just essentially have like a bootstrap like Docker or something, right? Where we have like, up until like the point of launch, like all the chain data is just saved that could like basically be bootstrapped. So we're not like going back to the beginning of the blockchain, right?
You're not going to put all of that data in GitHub if that's what you're recommending. And no, yeah, it's a large image. It's not the best way to go about it. So it is a Docker image that'll fire up, that'll start pulling and syncing the data, right? And then it'll be able to uncompress the data as well, because they're going to be getting a compressed version of the Hive blockchain data. So it's not something you want to save to an image for the most part, because we would also have to update that image all the time, because the blockchain is getting longer every second of every day, right? So not the best way to go about it, although I know a couple of people have tried to mention that it's a large amount of data. I mean, we're paying $3,000 a month just to have it hosted. So the egress on that is pretty expensive too, depending on how many people are pulling the data, how often they pull the data. So it's best to set up as a caching service and just let the caching from R2 handle all of that nonsense. After that, I think section number 9 is the build and deploy internally. So this is going to be a 2-month-long process. And we know because we need to go through X amount of deployments, and the minimum that we would do in 2 months would be 4 deployments. I'd like to see it go through a lot higher, maybe like 6 deployment cycles, in order for us to make sure that everything works correctly, because we need to introduce changes to validators, and we need to make sure that if we're doing deployments on a Tuesday, then the validator deployments, depending on the kinds of changes, either need to happen before, during, or after, right? And so if we're going to sync data, or if we have to resync data in order to see changes come out of deployment, it could have a negative effect on how long deployments take, although I don't think it'll be too bad. And sometimes while we're doing deployments and we're syncing to our current bridges, our deployments take a lot longer because we'll get a couple thousand blocks behind where everything else is. So in order for us to come out of deployments, sometimes we'll be sitting there for 20, 30 minutes just waiting for blocks to catch up, depending on what bridge it is, how much we have to sync down, other things of that case. So that is a big concern of mine. And I also think it's one of the things that's going to take a lot longer than people would probably initially think. But after doing this for 2.5 years, I can tell you it's one of the most critical pieces to maintaining the validator code and maintaining the game's functionality, making sure that they're in sync. The next one is actually just as important, which is to build and deploy publicly. So as we introduce changes, we need to make sure that all the other validators are basically updating and syncing at the same time. And when you're updating remote systems, they take a lot of different, there's a lot of variability based on the machines that they're running, the locations that they're running from, the networks that they're on. So we just have to see how it works overall in doing so. And I have a lot of experience running a large, I don't know if probably a lot of people don't understand my background and history, but I used to work with a lot of big funds, in like the biggest funds in America, basically. And we used to try to set up things called dark pools, right? So dark pools are basically like private EVM networks where you can see money go into them, and then the funds will have some kind of massive transaction between 2 counterparties, and they don't want anybody to see that. So it's like an Ethereum private network, and then all you see is the output, because when they shut the pool down, everything goes dark. You never see those transactions ever again, right? So anyways, I just know for doing this extensively in the past and using decentralized systems, that the possibility of people not syncing or getting updates is going to be really important, because we need to be able to identify what version of the validator that they're running on, and whether or not we're going to accept any kind of broadcast or a verification / validation from those validators too. So that'll be part of the public deploys. That's about 2 months out, or sorry, that is also like another 2-month process of testing. And then we have our test bridges as well. So these are pretty these ensure the connections between the different systems and components. So test bridges we use all the time internally. So these ones, I want to say, is about 30 days. It could take a little bit longer, just to make sure that the bridges connect to the different components of the system, and to make sure that the system can operate on the bridging functions that we have. We have another one, which is the Hive-D proxy. So we have to integrate the Hive-D proxy into the overall system too. This one, we're more or less still in a planning phase on some of the stuff that needs to happen here, but we'll have more updates for it hopefully here pretty soon. And then we have internal testing, which we're currently in right now. I think we run into the phase B of internal testing this month, I'm pretty sure. I'll have to double check, but it's just a comprehensive internal test of features, basically. And then our external testing, and then finally the public release candidate. So the external testing, will probably have GitHub set up. People can pull and start testing code, look at the code. This isn't in any order, by the way. We're hoping to have the external testing out much sooner than most of these things. But we just won't be relaying from external testers, right? So with that being said, the external testing will be when we open up GitHub here pretty soon. and allow people to start testing different functions of the validator. And then as we go through and add functionality, they'll have to keep their commits up to date with our main branch. And then, this is going to be kind of just, there's really no timeline on this one as far as how long it'll take, because it's going to be something that happens throughout the whole entire project from here on out. And so I know you guys can see my screen. I have a really ugly timeline here for different things that we're currently in. I had to put it to the side and flip the different components here sideways just because they were too long to put on a single screen. So I apologize. Normally I would flip it and share it with you guys on a vertical monitor, but I can't do that today. And so there's just different phases of testing that we'll be going through, and they're just signified by like an A, B, C, D kind of coordinates. But yeah, for the most part, we still have a ton of work to do. This is going to be, as I always try to mention, a hypercritical piece of decentralization for the DAO. And it's a lot more complicated than people think. I mean, it's not just rebroadcasting transactions. There's quite a bit here that has to go into the system and that the game relies on in order for it to operate and function correctly. So, and I believe the people that we have working on it are the best people we could have in the world working on this product, because they're so familiar with the internal infrastructure as well as the networking behind a lot of the Splinterlands code. They built most of the infrastructure for it to begin with. So, this is kind of a quality over quantity function here, but hopefully this gives people a little bit of an idea and a roadmap for where we're headed. So I appreciate it. And then Clay, if there's any questions, just feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, so one question that I've started seeing kind of like get brought up recently, and I guess it's something that we have to start thinking about. There seems to be some support for the idea of adding transaction fees. Something to support like the people running nodes and validators, beyond the white paper distribution phase. Hypothetically, like let's say we want to add like some sort of, I don't know, like a bridge tax, I'm guessing, because I don't see like actual like charging per transaction working with this, but like let's say they want to add like some sort of bridge tax, maybe like 0.4% and like 0.2% is burned, 0.2% goes to the validators, something like we'd have to figure out the specifics from like a vote. How hard do you think it would be to work in something like that?
It's not, I mean, it's a good question, because it depends on at where they want to charge for the transactions and how they want to charge, and then how you delegate the transaction fees. And are you pooling transaction fees and then basing it on the quality of the node? Because then you have to have a quality assurance piece that's going to go through and grade all the nodes. They do this on Ethereum, by the way. EVMs like Geth, they have this kind of like a reputation score of how many transactions you can validate and the quality of the transactions that you validate, like how many of them fail. And so just a quick side story here. I used to work in high frequency trading, and we would observe all the transactions from Ethereum in the mempool, right? And the reason that we would do that is so that we could identify large transactions and then gas our transactions in front of them in order to commit arbitrage. That's kind of one of the main market functions of high frequency traders, right? In order for you to do that, you have to have a really good reputation. So what would happen, and it's a fairly easy hack to do, is on Ethereum, you would set your nodes in different endpoints throughout the world. So we call them AZs, availability zones, right? If you're using AWS infrastructure. And mempools are typically pretty slow. Ethereum's used to be like 30 seconds or something like that till you got to your peak confirmations. So you could use like a DynamoDB service on AWS to sync all of your nodes faster than the network would rebroadcast transactions. And then you could basically have all of your nodes give each other a really good reputation by resubmitting the same transactions that you knew were going to go through. So it was really easy to kind of hack and bypass the system used to verify whether or not those nodes were quality or if they were, bad actors, right? So we would just give ourselves a really good reputation by doing that, right? Because we were submitting transactions faster than everybody, and we knew all of those transactions were going to go through because we were observing the quality of transactions in the mempool, and we would just take transactions from already well-established nodes in order to do that. So, I mean, that's a hyper complex situation, but if we're going to do transactions and there's going to be a mechanism for quality assurance on transactions, it can very quickly become a project. So although I'm not really, like, one of the reasons we're on Hive is because we didn't want transaction fees, right? So I don't know how that's going to play into the overall ecosystem, but it'd be interesting to see how people want to see that work. And I don't know if they've given it as much thought as it actually requires.
And in my opinion, in my opinion, I don't think actual transaction fees are the way to go. I think it would not be very practical, but like something like like an on ramp and or like off ramp, like some small percentage for, like, what I'm assuming is like moving tokens from, like, let's say BSC onto the SPS chain, like maybe. And again, like, this is just like me thinking based on the conversations I saw. Like, I think like the most logical thing would be some form of like bridge fee. But yeah, I definitely do not think we want to go back and try to rework the entire validator network to have transaction fees for every transaction or something like that. That would be horrible.
Yeah, it's not going to be a fun one. And I think there's a lot more thought that goes into how you're going to manage the way you pay out on something like that, right? Because then, what if somebody has like a really horrible network and they're running on a really slow server and they have just not very good service? How are you going to delineate what they earn in fees compared to somebody that's spending money on a really nice instance and has a really great connection that's doing most of the heavy lifting, right? So I'd be interested in hearing some proposals, but I doubt that that's really going to play out in the overall scheme of things. More or less, I think that's also kind of a good segue into just trying to think about ways that the DAO can earn and make money, right? Like, there's a lot of opportunities, and this is, it's kind of hard to separate the fact that we're a gaming community versus a decentralized community, right? Because there are two different aspects of how the DAO should operate, and a lot of people are, two different audiences, really. Some of them are game centric, the other ones are more decentralized, environment centric, right? And so they have different needs and wants. And Splinterlands being the size that it is, with how many people still use the game, even though we're in a lull right now, is still a very massive application compared to all of the other decentralized applications out there, right? So I think what would make more sense is try to figure out ways for the SPS DAO to earn and receive rewards and then have distributions based on some kind of system like that, versus trying to have individual transactions be part of how the network is able to attain value, right?
So basically, you like buy back SPS and like use that to reward validators into the future or something like that.
Could be, I mean, or just the fact that one of the conversations we're about to dive into is about pooling, right? Pools require liquidity providers. Liquidity providers earn yields, right? So if that's the case, then the reward distribution could be based on LP, but it could also be based on some kind of transaction service, right? So it's just a thought that I'm throwing out there, and it's not something that we're actively working on, but and I see another thing too, pretty common in Discord. People are always talking about how the DAO needs to make money. Although I don't think it's necessarily the primary function of the DAO. The DAO is really just to manage, like the Fed would, the token, like the Fed would manage the dollar, right? It's a decentralized body that is able to vote on where they want the value of the SPS token to really be utilized in a sense, right? And how it'll be utilized and how it'll earn fees, so on and so forth. So um, I guess it may be a good segue to get into the token stuff here, unless you want to focus on validators for a little bit longer, which I'm happy to do.
Yeah,
Um,
that was, I think, let's see, there was one other question, who's going to run the Splinterlands APIs, like balance history, is that stored on the validators, or is that something that Splinterlands will still have centralized?
no, that's all part of the well, the balance history actually exists on the chain data, right? So balance history you can actually pull yourself if you want to go through and run through all the chain data. You have to map all the wallets and stuff, but we will maintain a copy of balance history because I know it's an active API that people use inside of the game. So we'll maintain that for now. Um, and also just because we have to do rollups on it because it's a huge table, so we can pull um, rollups on balance history pretty easily that way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so, one of the things you touched on earlier, and I guess, like, I guess, like, if we're going to have, like, a realistic conversation about this, like, let's say validators go live, like, we have validators running, the network's decentralized, like obviously there's like IP issues and stuff, but like assuming something happens to the company, like what are the odds that the DAO would be able to, you know, get the game back up and running without the company being involved? Like, do you think this is something that's feasible?
That is a great question, and that's something that we've talked about in contingency planning, right? So, um, as far as contingency, I think that the DAO ought to ask for a perpetual license to all code in case something does happen, and that's a proposal that needs to be made. And that perpetual license will just grant access to um, the basically the operational code and data uh, tied to the gaming, right? But I think that's a an absolutely necessary contingency to have at some point. Um, and the other part of that is clear separation between the entities, right? Because Splinterlands has its own liabilities that it manages, right, separate from the DAO. And I know the DAO is becoming a more formalized entity again out in Panama, I believe, right, as a foundation. But it would behoove us as a community to have some contingency here in case anything does happen, because there's a lot of ifs in the decentralized world, and all it takes is one more FTX like disaster to really throw us in a tailwind, right? And I'd hate to see that happen. I think all the players here would hate to see that happen. Although the assets will exist pretty much forever. Um, the actual function of the game itself and all of the different aspects of the game would be terribly hard to recreate, right? So it would be awesome if there was a proposal out there for some kind of perpetual game stay license that kicks in if anything happens to Splinterlands, that makes sure that the players are always covered and that the DAO always has some reassurance. I think it's absolutely necessary for people to think like that. I'm not trying to spook anybody by any means. I always have to think in terms of security, right? And in this special case, I get to separate my liability from the company to the liability of the actual players here. And you know, if I were a heavily invested player in the game, that would be one of the major contingencies that I would be looking to have some answers on, right? And that way,
Yeah.
there's just always a plan, basically, that we always have something that we can fall back on.
Yeah, just for context, like this, I mean, and you know where my head's at, and just for like the people listening, like I'm not like currently like worried, you know what I'm saying? Like, but
No,
like it's like these are the things, like I don't, a lot of people see like the proposals and stuff I make, and they see like a lot of like the very obvious like out front conversations that I have, but like in my mind, like these are the things that are always on my mind, right? Like it's literally like my main like modus operandi, right? Like how does the DAO become self-sustaining to where it can survive anything? Like that's literally like what's on my mind like at all times. And like it's one of the things. It's like I know that that's our biggest like our biggest like uncontrollable potential point of failure is like you said, like we don't own like the IP. And I don't think it's necessarily like something we want to like go out and own. Like I don't think anybody's like looking for any scenario where they want the company to not be involved. But yeah, it's like I do think that as big as this project has gotten, especially like getting into a more decentralized manner, I think it's something that we do have to consider long term. And even if it's just like a contingency, like if something happens to the company, then we get the license, something like that. Yeah, like I'll probably put together a proposal for something like that. I think we should finish setting up the foundation first, because I think that the foundation needs to like actually own the license. I think that would be the smart way to do this. But yeah. So it's just like
Yeah,
not to freak people out. Like PJ's saying, it's just like these are the thoughts that I feel like I always have to be thinking about because I always have to think about like the what if scenarios.
I wish I could share the risk roadmap that I go through every year and do. It's part of my job as a CTO is to make sure that there is some kind of action that can be taken. Although it's a playbook more than it is a set of rules. At least we know, and like it's how do I say? I'm not trying to be morbid, but like in case key people are something happens to key people in the company, it's not like a key man insurance policy. It's more like a key man playbook, right? So, if something were to happen to Matt or if something were to happen to me, or if something were to happen to aspect of the game or something happens to Amazon Web Services or Cloudflare, where do we go? What do we do? I have to do that for every single bit of risk. And it's something that I pretty much hold sacred behind the scenes right now. It's not something I would put out publicly because there's a lot of stuff that has to deal with like internal legal risks and things of that nature. But I would be happy to help you put one together for the DAO as well, some kind of risk roadmap that gives us the ability to have contingent actions on any type of issue. And that way we could say, hey, at least we thought about it and we have an idea of what we need to do. Because the last thing you want to have is any form of leadership get paralyzed, right? It's kind of like you could see the iceberg coming at you and the captain of the ship is just like frozen, right? Because he knows, hey, we're about to hit an iceberg. And so people saying, Captain, what do we do? What do we do? And the captain's just kind of frozen. You don't want that. What you want to have is some kind of playbook that says, okay, if this happens, like we've thought about it, here's what we thought we would do. And maybe, who knows, if it's an up-to-date version of it, usually you can execute pretty quickly. But you basically create a list of all the things you have, your systemic, non-systemic risk factors, especially in cryptocurrency, right? And as we start to talk more about decentralized finance aspects of this too, there should be a risk playbook as well. Like, what do you do if there's another FTX event? What do you do if the token gets hacked and something happens on a bridge, right? Who does what? Who are the actors? How many people have to sign on pausing a token transaction, or how many people does it take to shut down the validator network, right? So those are all things that would be put into a risk playbook, and then you would have your contingencies for each of these, right? And so what you're talking about is like the overarching something happens to Splinterlands, right? But that's where you start, and then you got to get into the nitty gritty details of each aspect of what could go wrong, and then the high, let's just say, for example, something happens to Hive, right? Like I have a playbook on what we do if something happens to the Hive network, right? Like it's a pretty well spelled out. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, right? And a lot of it requires us to have some kind of backup version of code. Because Hive is a decentralized product, for example, I can go back in the Git history and try to see if we should establish a build process at a certain point in time because of some kind of functionality or some kind of market function that was corrupted or was basically a vector for attack, right? So with that consideration, like that's actually the primary focus of any kind of chief technology officer is really to mitigate risk and have contingency plans for every aspect of the business and the operation itself, right? And so every time we would bring on like a new third party service, even like Jira, which we use for our project management, it's like, okay, well, if Jira goes down and we lose the whole entire history of stuff, how can we pull up all of the remaining issues and bugs that we had, right? Because Jira service goes down. Or I've had it once where Jira had wiped entire projects from our instance because they did updates that were breaking changes that they didn't know, right? So it just comes from experience, I guess, in a sense, where you just more or less, as they say, WA, no probia, which is trust but verify, right? Um, so, that's just kind of the motto. And if we want to be safe and we continue to want to have a secure environment, that's something that we should be hyper aware of at all times. So
Yeah,
just putting
yeah.
that out there.
I think that's definitely something we can work towards. Speaking of things that we have been working towards, I guess this is so we don't go on forever, but I think it's important to touch on some of the DeFi stuff. I know, like I've kind of shared my thoughts on this. People know that I'm pretty like proactive in the I guess like the movement to kind of like eliminate renting liquidity and like kind of like reforming our entire LP situation. Now, like to really go further with this, like we've had to do some things. Like I spent a while working with people like PJ and Royal Eagle to audit the SPS distribution, right? And like the main reason for that is like we need to know where we're at, right? Like we need to know where we're at as far as token distribution. Like obviously we saw we're ahead some places, we're behind others. Kind of like just getting to a point where like we have a good functional understanding of where we're at. Also, we need to know like key addresses. We need like specific information to update the coin tracking sites. Which one of the things like while we were working on this whole process that I started kind of like pushing the narrative on and like talking to PJ about, since he has a lot of experience with this, is the idea of expanding SPS into new chains and to essentially like develop a strategy to have the DAO utilize its own liquidity, like its own like the idea of like there's a term for it called protocol owned liquidity. The idea that like the DAO owns its own LPs, the DAO like gets trading fees from its LPs. It doesn't mean other people can't participate in them, but what it means is that the DAO has like some set amount of liquidity that it puts out into the greater ecosystem to basically generate revenue for itself. And it can grow over time. Like there's like basically like there's a lot of options of what you can do, but like the foundation to getting to that point where you have the resources coming in is figuring out a strategy of how you want to expand, how you want to deploy. And that's one of the things that I've been working with PJ on, is just kind of like figuring out what do we need to actually do this, which is basically a developer that can deploy the contracts and test them, make sure we're not going out and doing anything dangerous that's going to like expose our token. And then we need to obviously have like a proposal to, dedicate target liquidity to go out and expand into these chains. I guess like we need somebody like me or other people from the community that are going to go and try to establish partnerships with, like let's say decentralized exchanges on other chains or games on other chains. We had to go out there and try to like actually get some kind of foothold into these other chains. But yeah, so PJ, you want to kind of like talk about the liquidity strategy?
Yeah. I thought you were gonna have us talk about Solana meme coins, and that we were just gonna
Well,
go ape into a bunch of Solana meme coins here, Clay.
oh
Just
yeah,
kidding.
yeah. Well,
Um,
hey, somebody wants to make a proposal for the DAO to go buy a whole bunch of dog with hat or something like that. I mean, I
yeah,
can't stop you, but the wells
makes
will
total
not.
sense, right? Yeah, we're gonna 1000x our gains. So, all right. So this presentation, I'm sorry, it's not necessarily a Splinterlands themed presentation, because I didn't have our designers were busy working on other stuff, so I just grabbed a bunch of AI generated images and kind of threw this together. And I'm a fan of lo-fi music because late at night when I'm working, I plop on my headphones, listen to some lo-fi beats, and I just start coding away, right? And to give you a little bit more context here, the company I started, an analytics firm, was featured at the World Economic Forum twice. We had Goldman Sachs invest in our company. We had the CME Chicago, the Mercantile Exchange out in Chicago was also an investor. We had a ton of different high frequency trading firms that were investors in the company because of our ability to do market analytics, right? We were probably and still are probably the world's best decentralized analytics company. It's not a decentralized service, but we would monitor decentralized networks and provide access to firms. They're the largest firms in the world, basically Goldman Sachs, Jump, Acuna, Citadel, Capital Markets Trading. There's a bunch of them. And so in doing so, I also, and just to kind of give a little bit more reference, just yesterday, I was at the University of California, Irvine at the Paul Mirage School of Business teaching a class on this very topic, right? So I don't share this presentation too often. This is one that's kind of more behind the scenes about strategy, right? And also having some sort of, as Clay said, protocol-owned liquidity strategy. But it's also something that anybody can participate in and anybody could do once all of the correct networks are set up. So jumping into it, we're going to identify the problem, the fungible expansion, which means expanding our fungible tokens, a decentralized exchange strategy, enhanced price discovery, which is really important, especially with the fact that SPS has been getting crushed over the last 2 years. The primary market function here is arbitrage and how arbitrage opportunities are created. And then we have to have some sort of heuristic or projected outcome, and then look at the resources that are currently available. So one of the problems that we face right now is the fact that Hive is a pretty closed circuit ecosystem, and a majority of the value of all Hive and all of Splinterland's assets exists only on the Hive network, which is pretty cut off from all of the other decentralized networks out there. All right, so I'll give you some heuristics here about token prices, right? And although I think that the main indicator or the main cause and effect for token prices is actually a fun game for Splinterlands, unfortunately, because we're on Hive, we'll also have this extended or arm's length transactional value that also has a bearing on our token prices. But the idea behind this is there's really not sufficient diversification and liquidity sources, right? And what that means is there's not a lot of places that you can pick up these tokens and move them into the ecosystem, right? I mean, if you're talking about centralized exchanges, you're basically just trading on a centralized exchange, and that's surface level activity. But what we have is a very, very deep market. And deep markets tend to only have surface level activity, and a deep market also has downward force and projection on price, because there is a ton of value with little utility. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense as to what I'm talking about when I say a deep market, right? It also becomes like the fact that you have so much liquidity in a single source that the primary two functions of decentralized markets is to provide liquidity and then to extend price discovery through arbitrage, which is to take value from one place and rediscover the value in another place, or sell something, buy low in one market, sell high in another market, right? So we have a very, very narrow market with Hive. And I'm hoping that this is something that Hive picks up on as well, because this is a great opportunity for both of these companies, or let's call them communities, actually, to take advantage of. And I say we because we're all kind of well more connected than people would like to think. There's a direct correlation between Hive success and Splinterland success, and vice versa. So we need to have some kind of strategy, as Clay was talking about. The easiest way to do this, and the most tried and tested way, is to extend the token protocol onto third parties. And so they aren't the primary source of the liquidity, although I know SPS was launched on BSC, Binance Smart Chain. They're all ERC20 compatible. ERC20 is a token contract type for fungible tokens on EVMs, which are Ethereum virtual machines, right? So these should, in theory, and I say in theory because things change all the time, you write one contract and it should technically work across most EVM networks, right? So what we would do is we would basically expand our Ethereum EVM blockchain access by basically launching contracts on these different chains and then providing liquidity to these chains via either the DAO or by the user base, allowing people to participate in this expansion. And then it also gives us a lot of opportunities to go out and talk to different chains about moving liquidity and joining the effort, because these guys all have the same type of problem that we do, which is they have a lot of protocol owned liquidity that is not used, and it is best to spread it out to some extent, because if you have a deep market, the only way you can solve that problem is by spreading it out, right? So instead of going deep, you want to go wide. So there is potential for partnerships. I know that this was something that Chowda was originally working on a while ago, but also Clay has been basically coming back and reworking all of these relationships and has had many discussions with me about what we should do, where we should go. And I would really like to see more participation from the community if this is something that they want to consider doing. Again, these are all, none of this is actually going to happen without the community actually being a part of it. So this isn't like a dictation here. This is more of just ideas, right? The other thing is too, is that it opens us up to all these different chains that are currently EVM compatible that are massive chains. Obviously Ethereum being the largest, and you have the Binance Smart Chain, which we're already on. We have Avalanche, Optimism, Arbitron, Polygon, and Cello. And then because I know Clay loves his meme coins so much, we would consider doing the same thing with new contracts, but set up for Solana and Solana-based bridges. So with that in consideration, if you think about how liquidity works, like what I would do is I would say if you took all the liquidity that was on Hive and you cut it in half and you left half of it on Hive, then the other half you could spread out between these 7 different chains right here, or 8 different chains, including Solana, and you'd have a very, very diverse market. And so the other thing is too, is that each of these chains has their own decentralized exchange, or a primary decentralized exchange. One that's available on pretty much all of these is Uniswap, right? So now you can further chop up that half of the liquidity that you've already divided by 8 different chains, and now you can divide it even further into different pools across different markets, and these markets would be the different decentralized exchanges that are out there. So Uniswap is the largest, at least in continuous activity. I know that there are some Solana exchanges right now that have more volume than Uniswap, but I would say from a total locked value, Uniswap is the largest, followed by PancakeSwap, and then Balancer, SushiSwap, DYDX, and Curve. Now, some of these are going to be extremely hard to get any kind of listing on, but the hope here is that as we start to spread out liquidity, we would start to see transactional volume pick up across different chains, and it gives us kind of a much more broad perspective on how we can earn fees. And then also the big piece here is price discovery. And when we're talking about price discovery means that you'll have the best way for us to think about price discovery is in terms of payment providers, right? So if people are coming into the ecosystem, currently Transact's like one of the only payment providers, fiat on-ramps for us to use for Hive and for Splinterlands, right? So we're limited to like one payment provider. And that's because the payment provider has to make an investment into their ecosystem to support Hive, because there's no other chain out there that operates like that, right? So it's a massive investment with really the reason that they're doing it is because they want access to transactions on Splinterlands, because Splinterlands is a vast majority of the fiat transactions that happen on Hive, right? So Splinterlands, in a sense, like, well, we only need one payment provider. It'd be nice to have multiple in case anything happens. Again, it's part of contingency. But it's very hard for us to do because it's a huge investment on behalf of the payment providers and a huge security risk because now it's a whole separate vector that they have to be aware of, right? So if we start doing a more EVM approach strategy, what you're going to notice in this is that it's a lot easier to onboard payment providers and fiat on-ramps because they can use their existing code to purchase tokens on any of the EVM networks that they more than likely already have, right? So we're just making our token now available on a network that they already support. So for them to onboard new tokens is relatively easy, right? And so the investment from payment providers becomes a lot less of a headache, and it has a lot more security because it's something that they're already doing, right? And that doesn't exist right now. And it's also, again, one of the big hurdles that we have being allocated with most of our liquidity on Hive, right? And then price discovery means that when someone goes to make a purchase, they have multiple markets that they can choose from. And those markets should, in theory, have different prices because the prices will vary due to the accessibility of certain markets. Maybe more people use Binance Smart Chain than they use Cello. Or maybe we don't even want to use Cello because it's kind of a more obscure chain. And it's just Polygon, right? And the price will separate, meaning that you'll have one that will sell for a lot less than another, right? So it makes sense for the payment provider to use the cheaper tokens in order to sell to their audience, right, or to their customers. And when that happens, it makes sense for people over on another chain to move value from that chain and to commit arbitrage between the two prices so that they can recoup some of the value, and that will restore parity, right? And so now you have a market function that is allowing people to use the free markets to find the best price for a product. And then you also have arbitrageurs that can come in and create price parity between the two chains. Once it gets to a certain percentage, what you do is you basically say, okay, if it's going to, if there's a $2,000 pool over here with a price discrepancy of 20%, how much is it going to cost me in fees to move from pool A to pool B so that I could take advantage of that $2,000 20% difference? And if the juice is worth the squeeze, then what'll happen is they'll bridge their funds over, transfer into the pool, sell their tokens for a lot more than they were on another chain, and create some price parity that way, or buy tokens back because they're cheaper on one chain and you're going to go sell them on another, right? And then also the major market function for decentralized exchanges like Uniswap is actually arbitrage, and it's called triangular arbitrage. And so one of the things that you find out is you're not even really dealing with people that are trying to swap token A for swap token B. What they're actually doing is they're using token C to swap between token A and token B in order to get token C, which could be a stable coin or could be a base chain coin like Ethereum, right? And so in doing so, you create a lot of optionality in the way that you can create value for LPs because basically anybody that's providing liquidity on those chains is going to earn fees, right? And that's the primary function of liquidity providers on these chains, is to earn yields, which are basically transactional fees based on the amount of transactions that happen. So this is kind of the idea behind what the market function is. It's also something that provides a lot of positive sentiment, right? So one of the things that I used to teach at these big funds, I would walk in and I would talk about something called reflexivity, right? Which is a term in markets that was coined by George Soros in the Alchemy of Finance in 1984, which basically describes the fact that markets are self-fulfilling prophecies, right? People will look at the price of an asset, they'll do some kind of fundamental analysis and then take action on that fundamental analysis, which will in turn affect the price, which affects the fundamentals, which affects the action that they take. And it's just this recursive cycle that creates these pump and dump. You'll see like prices just go wild, basically. I don't want to say pump and dump because that's not really what it is. More or less, it creates volatility in markets. So it turns a mound into a mountain, and it'll turn, a little crater into a valley, right? As far as volatility. And in a liquidity provider's position, that's exactly what you want to see. You want to see a lot of volatility with a lot of trade activity because you're going to earn really, really high fees because of that. So reflexivity is more about narratives than it is about actual fundamental analysis, because we have to assume that people's emotions are involved at all times in making decisions, right? And people are the most irrational when they are either very, very happy or very, very scared, right? So that is literally how crypto works, because all transactions are basically transparent. You can see everything on chain. And so people will speculate like crazy. And reflexivity is literally the driving force behind volatility in decentralized markets. So it's a little bit off topic, but I thought I'd share that because it's really important to understand from a much more technical perspective why these things work. And so those narratives, in a sense, you could say, hey, because we've had so much deep liquidity issues on Hive with such little access and surface level activity, it has been causing downward pressure on all the tokens on Hive because of that, right? They're just too deep of markets. There's not enough activity to make it worth people's time. So in theory, you spread all of that available liquidity out, and it'll cause price dislocation, which will cause the activity to move. And it also creates really great narratives, right? And those narratives are things that people use like social currency, right? And they go out and they start talking about things, which creates positive sentiment. So in that, the idea here is that we would have a broader market reach, which leads to more different, more trading pairs, right? Once we're on EVMs, people can make pools with SPS tokens with anything, right? They could pair it with Clay's favorite meme coins on Solana, right? They could take their own guild tokens that they have and pair them with SPS or with DEC or whichever token it is, right? And then you'll also have more opportunity to have arm's length value extended to other communities that are inside Splinterland. So I know that there are a couple different guilds that have their own tokens, right? I would encourage them to follow suit here and do what we do, because in that sense, you're going to create a lot more options and a lot more capability for arbitrageurs to come in and trade your tokens and create volume. And because it's such I would say because Splinterlands already has so much transactional volume, if it were to extend in any means out to any of these chains, these liquidity pools will become extremely valuable, right? Also, the next thing is that it creates more consistent token pricing across all of the different analytics platforms. They'll have to track all of these prices across different trading pairs that we have, which again just makes it a lot easier and a lot more accessible to speculators on our tokens, and it should again increase volume. It's not going to be parabolic, but it'd be a nice consistent increase in transactional volume. And then as arbitrage starts to take a hold of the market, it creates tighter spreads across all of the different surfaces, hopefully, which again is just another market function that improves the liquidity that we have. And then finally, reduce prices as well. As payment providers are trying to onboard customers, they'll have multiple markets that they can choose from in order to actually onboard clients, which will have different prices. And it will encourage people to take advantage of those prices while they're available comparative to the rest of the market. So, and these are just market functions. This is nothing to do with the game itself, right? I've talked a lot about arbitrage, but I don't need to harp too much on it. But just real quick, I have 4 points on here, which I've already pretty much said like quite a few times. But increases liquidity and supports arbitrage trading, aligns prices across exchanges, it boosts market efficiency and reduces pricing gaps, and incentivizes liquidity providers to stake pool funds, right? And so now you'll have many options about which pools you want to put them in, your liquidity into. And those pools, based on the volume that they have, will have different fees tied to them. And typically you'll also see people that chase around the fees, right? So if someone owns a lot of tokens and they want to go make liquidity somewhere, and they find out that, they're on, let's just say, for example, Ethereum, and Ethereum's too expensive for people to transact on. So they'll jump over to Optimism and they'll start making liquidity over on Optimism because it'll cost 2 cents instead of $20. in order to conduct a transaction, then you'll see a lot of that moving around. And what's really nice too is if the DAO is the first market maker in those positions, the DAO will earn funds the whole entire time the market is trying to do its discovery, right? Which is also just an awesome benefit for the DAO itself.
Yeah,
And so the sorry.
I think this would be a good point. Like, I want to address one of the questions. So Lewis was asking, do we risk spreading things too thin? And like I would say that's the wrong mentality to have. Like I wouldn't say too thin is really necessarily the problem here. Like what you really want is exposure to many more trading pairs, right? Like the whole idea is basically every time something moves, there's a new trading opportunity, right? Like whether that is a like a payment provider buying tokens versus SPS versus ETH, on like BSC, right? Like that creates some movement. Now, what happens? Like, let's say that one pool moves 5 or 10%. All of a sudden, there's an arbitrage opportunity there. But like the idea is you have multiple pools with multiple different trading pairs, so there's multiple arbitrage opportunities coming from lots of different angles, right? So like let's say you have a SPS ETH pool, you have a SPS BTC pool, you have an SPS Matic pool, right? Well, Matic goes up 5%, Bitcoin goes down 10%, Ethereum goes up 7%. That's 3 different arbitrage opportunities, even if SPS price doesn't move. Now, also, if SPS price moves versus the other token staying still, those are still more arbitrage opportunities. And the idea of like a payment provider coming in and starting tapping into these markets is you're going to be moving these pools. So like when you say spreading yourself too thin, I think the idea is like you want to find the sweet spot, right? So like PJ, what would you say? Something like $10,000-$20,000 into these like little small kind of like satellite pools. Like let's say you want to open up 5 of these different pools with different pairs on each chain. Then
Yeah, you need about 25 grand just because that's what payment providers require typically, right? And I say payment providers will be our, uh, you know, in if this is something that is, uh, you know, the something that the community wants to vote on, that basically you would probably want to have a minimum of 25,000. You could basically get away with a single-sided pool using Uniswap v3, which means you only have to deposit one token type into the pool, and then you have all of the value adjusted based on the offer price. So you don't have to provide like Ethereum or USDC or something of that sort. Um, but yeah, about 25 grand is where you want to be per pool, right? So it's not a ton of money. And then, yeah, the beauty of this actually is that you can scale into it. Doesn't mean we have to, I mean, we can launch all the contracts at the same time, but it doesn't mean we have to put tokens over there necessarily all the time. And actually, let me back up. You should just expect that people will start pairing with other things because now they have the option to, and they're going to make markets however they want, and we can't control that. But that's exactly what we want to see. We want to see the type of distribution being paired up with other projects, right? If other projects are trying to move into the Splinterlands ecosystem, then we can make it, necessary for them to pair their tokens up with ours in order to create liquidity for these types of positions, right? So it's a very scalable, very easy way to scale into markets, and to have at least some initial control by the DAO by making the first initial pull. But the markets are just going to market. I mean, people will take advantage of it, and that's the great part about having speculators in this market is the fact that people will do their own thing and they will try to create value any which way that they possibly can. And honestly, like that, what is the purpose of a DAO if not that, right? Like, that's the whole point. So it's something that we could scale into, right? It's not something that we have to necessarily dive headlong into right out of the gate. And it's it offers us a lot more opportunity.
So PJ, like hypothetically,
yeah.
Like let's say we want to start like slow rolling this strategy out or something, right? Like, let's say we wanted to go to PancakeSwap and we want to deploy 5 different V3 1% pools with like a targeted amount of SPS into each. And then like, like we see how it goes, right? Like kind of gauge it, kind of like gather some data, figure out like, what kind of funds we're making. And guys, just for context, like I was looking earlier at just the whenever we were doing some of the DeFi reform for the BNB SPS pool, I want to say I looked earlier and like we're closing in on almost $3,000 from that one pool just in trading fees. But yeah, like what's cool is like this is a great way for the DAO to actually get exposure to other tokens too, right? Like I can't tell you how many times people are like, why doesn't the DAO hold Bitcoin? And I'm like,
I have this super weird thought where this is one that a lot of people call me crazy for, because I've said this in some pretty professional settings. I do a lot of work with banks, and I mean really, really big banks. A lot of banks that some people on this call probably have money in, right? And one of the things that I always threaten is that younger generations and people that are younger than me, I'm 40 years old, right? We don't trust the banks. I mean, I was in the mortgage industry and a finance lender selling mortgages on the secondary market in 35 different states when the 2007-2008 financial crisis happened. And as they say in the movies, the music stopped, right? I don't trust banks. I really don't. I don't think that they, for years and years and years, banks, I had money sitting in a bank account, in a savings account that earned 0.02%, which is ridiculous because these banks were making more money than ever and they were using taxpayer funds to do it. And they were taking more risk than anybody should have ever gotten into. So I don't trust banks. And now we realize that, oh, hey, there's banks out there giving like 5% APRs now. What the hell, right? They could have done this all along, but they just chose not to, right? So I'm not a fan of banks. And, our generation, and I don't want to say my generation necessarily, but younger generations have really missed out on the value that the stock market has provided, right? Unless you're a generational wealth type of person. It's very risky to buy in at, unrealistic all-time highs for a lot of these companies because it seems like a Ponzi scheme, honestly. And it's just not something I really want to take, putting my whole entire financial future in, because I've seen what has happened. Right? I was around when AGI got liquidated, or was it American AIG was liquidated? Trillions of dollars of assets just wiped off the balance sheet through a backdoor bailout, right? So I feel like the younger generations nowadays have invested heavily in cryptocurrency because it's a new, great opportunity to be early in. It's something that the older generations don't necessarily understand. And, we saw Trump and we saw RFK out there speaking about Bitcoin recently, which means now people are really, starting to mainstream this whole idea of decentralized currencies and kind of removing the ability for banks to have these balance sheets that go on forever. I could talk about this for hours, actually. But anyways, my whole point being,
this is my stuff, and this is
okay.
like this is what I love.
So I was actually contracted out a while ago to create what they call decentralized credit markets. And decentralized credit markets allow you to create what they call stateful debt markets and stateful derivatives markets, right? So a lot of people, and I swear to God, this will come back to a story here, and it'll make sense in just a minute. But derivatives market, like if you think about how much money is floating around in debt in the United States, about $300 trillion in total. I think BlackRock just stated this like 2 days ago, right? But if you look at the derivatives markets, and it's in the quadrillions of dollars, the derivatives markets is completely unhinged, right? So one of the beautiful things about a blockchain is that they're stateful. And if our derivatives markets were required to be on some kind of decentralized platform that utilize ledger technology like this, then you would have what they call stateful derivative markets, meaning you would be able to see how much risk was out there at all times currently based on every new transaction that came into the derivatives market, meaning you would have completely stateful markets, right? And that would change the whole entire risk profile of all the debt that was accumulated throughout the whole entire world. And it would make it far more secure and easy to tell. It would eliminate systemic risk, right? So all of the on balance risk that's out there, you would be able to completely eliminate by having stateful derivatives markets. So, anyways, coming back to what this means in terms of how this affects us. So I've had this theory for a long time that during COVID, we had younger generations that got a lot of exposure through NFTs into decentralized markets and how you can store value in these types of assets, right? NFTs being, obviously part of a hype cycle, but we also saw the formation of guilds and things like Yield Guild, right? Um, and now I look at these guilds as basically decentralized versions of credit unions, right? These are people that came together for a purpose and provided value for something that they all had a like signature to. And now that value can be utilized in order to create yields and create value for those people based on their exposure to whatever it is that they're getting into. So I honestly believe that guilds will be the younger generation's version of a credit union to some extent and how they manage risk. Because if I look at how people play games, or let's just take Splinterlands into consideration here. Splinterlands has a community that's very vested in the the tokens, the assets, as well as the functions of the market, right? So they want to see things create value. They're all familiar with how it works. There are people out here who know more about Splinterlands than most of the team members do, right? That are considered to be, experts and domain experts, right? So, I look at it as people investing their time because it's not, why give it to a banker when you could do it with something that you love, right? And so I just kind of assume that this is where we're headed. And it's nothing, if I told this to any of these I have told this to banking executives, and they're like, oh, that's funny, right? But then you see what happens with narratives like GameStop, right? And then I bring that to their attention. I'm like, yeah, that's a reflexive cycle in the market. People didn't need to look at the fundamentals to necessarily buy into the narrative. And look what happened. It almost crushed a hedge fund. One of the biggest hedge funds had a ton of exposure in it, right? Caused all kinds of problems in the market, all because of a narrative, right? So then they kind of shut up and they start to listen, right? So anyways, that's my thought here, is that we'll probably start to see people treat their guilds more like they treat a credit union and start to take a more positive affirmative action in the way that things are done. Right. And honestly, I hate to say it, but everybody should become very familiar with market functions in decentralized gaming. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, play the game. Absolutely. But if you're going to be heavily invested, then you ought to start to understand the market functions as well. You can't just rely solely on, and unfortunately, I have to say this, it's because they're decentralized networks that you have to do that and you have to be educated. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context.
Yeah, so getting back into the liquidity strategy here for a moment, let's assume the DAO wants to do this, like let's say we start testing with like Pancake Swap, maybe we move into Base after like a couple of months, something like that. Like let's say we get a few of these like liquidity targets open on different chains. How hard is it to get involved with the payment providers, right? Like how difficult would it be to get them to start supporting Splinterlands?
So, as you know, we have a lot of cleanup to do, which you and Royal have been really just the people behind the scenes doing all of that, right? And you guys are helping clean up a lot of the analytics that we have on third-party sources like CoinMarketCap, CoinGecko, right? In fact, it's a terribly brutal process. I don't think anybody realizes how much work goes into that because of the validation that has to go into that, as well as just working with these companies, which have probably had a lot of problems internally themselves too. So communication is very difficult. It is a lot of work initially, but once you have a good vetted contract that's available for deployment, you can use, for the most part, that same contract across all of the different EVMs. So you only need one contract to hit most of the EVMs, right? Solana's a little different. Solana requires a code base. We have to have a node operating in order for us to transact and relay on that contract, right? So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more work, but it's one that we should consider also doing right out of the gate, because there's just so much transactional volume going on there as it is. And when we're talking about assets right now, we're not talking about the NFTs. We're talking about the fungible tokens, that the SPS in particular, and fungible tokens on EVMs are called ERC20 tokens, right? So that's not incredibly hard. The thing is that bridges are the #1 vector for attack, and I think I have just kind of a mock-up here that I can share. Yeah, can you see that, Clay? Is it showing the new? Or is it still showing?
I see the liquidity strategy.
Oh, okay, give me 1 second. I'll see if I can share my screen here again. Let me change screens. Come on. Discord is not letting me select it. Let me change windows.
So I know that like bridges are pretty much like the the biggest weak spot, biggest attack vector, and I know that's one of the reasons why we're working with TerraBlock. Do you like what are your thoughts in regards to that? Like, should we be aiming to have more providers, like more bridges?
Not really. I mean, TerraBlock hasn't done anything wrong to hurt us at all, right? They've done a good job, but they do have requirements, liquidity requirements, as well as reporting requirements that we have to hit. And so I'll explain just real quick how the bridging works. Let's just say if we're trying to, the idea behind this is actually how do you get tokens from an EVM network into the Splinterlands ecosystem once it's out there, right? And this whole entire operation here is actually flipped in reverse if you're trying to go from Splinterlands out to EVMs. But I have to think in first terms that we want to have payment providers be able to support EVM networks and somehow get those tokens into the game, right? So step one is you make a purchase from a fiat on-ramp, right? So our fiat on-ramp provider will have multiple choices that they could pull from, depending on which pool they want to purchase tokens from. And I say fiat, although you could use any cryptocurrency that has a pool in order to make the exchange, right? So in this example, I have SPS USDC, TUSD, Wrapped ETH, and Wrapped Bitcoin, because those are all readily available for the most part on exchanges like Uniswap. So we would have a SPS pool. Let's say it's a USDC transaction, which has parity with the dollar. So the fiat on-ramp provider is going to charge the customer $100, and they'll use their $100 in USDC that they have in their reserve to basically go out and buy tokens from the SPS/USDC market on a decentralized exchange. And then inside of that transaction, the fiat on-ramp provider will send those tokens to an SPS allocated bridge, either by the bridging protocol or something that we would have to manage ourselves. And inside of that wallet, basically, it will have a transaction signature that says, hey, these tokens belong to this user in Splinterlands, right? And it'll be labeled in the transaction. Basically, it's a bridge transaction function. Or they call it a bridge transfer on ERC20s for the most part. And in order to do a bridge transfer, you have to tell it where the destination of those tokens will end up, right? And so the SPS payment provider will send those tokens to that EVM contract. And hopefully that EVM contract will also be managed by the DAO as well. When it receives those tokens, the DAO can either do one of two things. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I'm on the same line here. You can either decide to burn the tokens or reissue the tokens back into the pool, right? It just depends on how you want to manage liquidity inside of the contract. You can either use a burn function, or you could just recirculate the existing ones that you have back into pools. Store them in a cold wallet, basically, where you decide when you want to put them back into the pool. And burning and minting is costly, so usually just sending them back into the pool is the best option. Once that happens, then we have basically a listening service set up on our end, and this is something that TerraBlock does, right? It listens for transactions into that contract, and anytime a new transaction occurs, it has to go through a validation process that says, okay, is the token that was deposited the correct type of token, and is the address that was provided for the destination of those tokens a real address, right? And if it is, then what will happen is you have to wait for X amount of block confirmations to occur in the contract. So typically on EVM, you're going to listen to anywhere from 5 to 35 block confirmations, depending on how the network is performing. And once those block confirmations queue has been expired, or basically there are no reorganizations that happen in the blocks, then the bridge would just basically issue those tokens directly to the customer's wallet. And there you go. That's how it happens. It's not instantaneous by any means. It could take upwards of 1 or 2 minutes for it to happen. But if you guys have ever purchased tokens from Transact on any of the EVMs, this is basically how it happens. So and nothing new here, right? It's not necessarily the quickest. We would also allow people to just hopefully, ideally there would be some kind of separate user interface that allows them to jump directly to send their own tokens through the bridge into there, so they don't have to necessarily go through the fiat on-ramp provider. But in order to do so, they would want to validate that the address that they're sending their tokens to, the destination address, is also included in the transfer. And you would just make that transfer function basically open to the public so people can move their tokens back and forth using the bridge, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be the payment provider, but in this example, it is using the payment provider. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more clarity into what has to happen. The reason that they're a vector for attack is because, I believe the biggest one to date was Wormhole on Solana, right? I think they got hit for 200 million in tokens that were extracted. And that's because in the burn mint function that they had, there was an exploit which allowed them to basically mint as many tokens as they needed and then transfer them out of the wormhole, right? So it's not something that we necessarily want to manage, although we can manage the base infrastructure for aspects of this and have the wallet set up so that the DAO has control over certain aspects of it. It is best to have some kind of third-party insured third-party that has its own separate set of checks and balances on top of our checks and balances in order to make this work. And although I will say from a deployment perspective, it's incredibly easy to do. It is one that you want to be incredibly thorough with. And it's not quite as easy as it seems at first, right? So there's a lot of security that goes into this stuff. And you also need to make sure, again, my role as CTO is to have contingencies. Like I am a contingency king, right? To make sure that if anything happens, there's the ability to have these administrative functions behind contracts, right? And so I can give you an example real quick of what some of these are. But the primary functions of contracts is to be administered by some kind of decentralized autonomous organization. They have a mint function, a burn function, a freeze and unfreeze function. Because in case anything happens in the bridge and it requires the bridge to go down, then we would have to freeze all of the assets from being transferred so that you can fix and then restart basically the tokens. And a lot of people hate this because they're like, well, that's not really decentralized and you could just freeze all the tokens. Well, I mean, yeah, it's very common that it's available, especially in large format functions. That's why you have a representative democracy and not a direct democracy with tokens, right? That's the whole point of a DAO, right? And then you have to have the bridge transfer function. So you have the standard transfer function, or in some cases, like with ERC 1155s, you have a multi-transfer function. In this case, we would have the bridge transfer function, which requires the, we could track the depositor address if we wanted to, but we would also have the destination address, which is a part of the transaction that has to be verified. And then there is, I believe that all of the contracts that we put out there should have some very standard withdraw function. I don't know if you guys have ever, or if you remember when ICOs were like a huge thing on Ethereum. People would just shoot tokens directly to the contract address, and they're fucking gone forever. You can't ever get them back, right? So when I write contracts, I typically have some sort of protection, just in case anybody accidentally shoots, $10,000 worth of the wrong token to the contract address. They can go through the proper support channels to have those tokens reissued back to them. But you have to have some kind of chain operator, again, like a DAO, that will be able to transfer those tokens back. So you can also deny them from being transferred, but the idea being that we would have multiple types of tokens that we would be able to bridge back and forth. You can create a whitelist or a blacklist. But for the most part, I just always have the variable standard withdrawal function in there. And then other necessary ERC20 transactions are just, how to say, like adding a bridge, removing a bridge, adding an admin, removing an admin, right? And managing the signers on the contract as well. And typically, I said freeze, unfreeze, but it's really pause, unpause is the standard nomenclature that's used for that. And then outside of that, we have checks on before token transfer, right? So anytime before a token is transferred, we have to check to make sure that the balances are available and that we can't run into any type of negative balance scenario. So those are just standard functions of most ERC20s. It's pretty straightforward. There's a million different ERC20 platforms. OpenZeppelin has most of the administration for these built into it. I use a ton of OpenZeppelin stuff for this, so relatively easy to understand. But yeah, that's it.
Okay, so let's say
the token.
Let's say the DAO wants to do this. Like, let's say I'm going to go put together a proposal, and let's say round one we're going for BSC. We already have 1% SPS ETH pool, so let's say we're gonna go for like $25,000 worth of liquidity for SPS USDC, SPS USDT, SPS wrapped BTC, and maybe we already have an SPS BNB pool too, so hypothetically, if we wanted to start like deploying on BSC, we have more we have some groundwork already laid there. We can start getting contracts deployed so that the tokens are ready to go on other chains if we want to. But so you're thinking like it should be.
Yeah, does the DAO have a Gnosis safe yet? Do we have a set Gnosis safe? Because that would be imperative for the DAO to actually go through the key signature operation of setting up Gnosis and getting everybody familiar with how Gnosis works.
Are you talking about safe protocol?
Yep.
Yeah, we have. That's how our ETH and our BSC wallets are set up, and reserve wallets.
Okay, and you guys have all your signers, and everybody is familiar with how to sign.
Yeah, so we actually
transactions.
I'll tell you this too. Like, we've actually been having like some issues with like trying to set up liquidity pools through the safe. For some reason, like the one that I was trying to do yesterday, it's getting a gas timeout, like a GA103 error. Are you familiar with some of this stuff?
100%, yeah. And sometimes what you have to do is run it through. So if you're familiar with Gnosis, it has applications inside the Gnosis safe, right? And you'll see them commonly get pulled and removed because they have issues with, especially on EVMs, gas issues, right? So, and depending, BSC is always funky because the chain ID is really weird. It's a fork of EVMs, and it has it's actually behind pretty far, if I remember correctly, from where traditional EVMs are, right? So BSC always has issues for the most part. My favorite is Optimism out of all of them. I work really closely with Optimism. I've done tens of millions of dollars of transactions in Optimism. But again, coming back to BSC, it is our primary chain, or I would say it's our secondary, but it was our initial chain for SPS token. Typically, so like depending on what type of pool you're trying to get into, for example, like I'll give you a really good example. version 2 pools on Uniswap is basically just an interface with a contract, right? Version 3 of Uniswap are NFTs that you can actually transfer, right? And your NFT on Uniswap v3, yeah, let me see. I could probably pull one up, actually. I mean, I have a million of them, but let's take a
Yeah,
look
we
at
have a few positions that are
Uniswap.
set up. It's just like for some reason, like whenever, like it doesn't really make sense because like we've set up pools on PancakeSwap through the Gnosis Safe app, but like
Mm-hmm.
the other day I think we tried 3 different times to set up a SPS ETH v3 1% position, and it just keeps giving us that gas error. So yeah, like
Yeah.
that's something. I mean, we don't have to like
Yeah.
derail this
So,
far, but like I'll follow up with you later.
oh, no. I was just saying that there's other ways to get around it where you can set the position up and then set the administrative wallet using the smart contract. So these are the Uniswap v3. Hopefully this doesn't take me to some weird. Let me see if I can just open the image here. So this is what it looks like, the Uniswap v3. Every single one of them is unique color, right? And what it has is basically the details of the position that you've created. And with the Uniswap v3 NFT, you can either transfer it to somebody that can hold the position for safekeeping but cannot access the liquidity, or you can set the administrator on it to somebody else so that they can manage it on your behalf without actually having to own the NFT. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so like I can transfer it to you and you still won't be able to do anything with it. You just own it, right? Or I could set you as the admin on it, and then I can still hold on to the position in my wallet and you'll be able to interact with it. So typically what I would say is you would transfer the NFT to the DAO wallet, right? Or have a wallet set up specific to holding these NFTs. And then you would set the administrator as either an operator within the DAO who can administer the position, or a third party that the DAO would hire to administer the position. Or you could just have the DAO itself require X amount of signatures in order to administer the position.
yeah. That's the problem we have right now. Is like we have 6 treasure. Well, we have 11 treasurers, but 6 of them have to sign. So it's
It's a pain
like
in the ass.
yeah, but like it's just like it's confusing to me because like we do the same thing, right? Like we've gone through, and I think we did like I don't know, like several of these transactions creating deck USDC you know,
Pools.
yeah, positions. Like it's really weird. Like I don't even think of them as pools. Like I literally think of them as like the NFT you create is like you're essentially creating a position in your wallet that is only active. Well, you can do infinite range, which is always active, but like it's like you know, especially like when you do like targeted ranges and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the liquidity is still just like in your possession. Like it doesn't even necessarily like go into a pool, right? Like V3 is very
No,
strange.
it definitely goes into a pool, but your NFT is tracking the position of the pool. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So it's interacting with the pool contract. So there's oh God, what's the name of it? There's a liquidity manager contract inside of Uniswap v3 in which it actually manages all of the liquidity. So all this NFT really is like your access card to that liquidity pool. And it says, here's what your access grants you. Does that make sense? Like it's basically like your key card into the liquidity pool.
yeah, I know. Like until we started doing the stuff with the DAO, I hadn't really done a whole lot with V3. But man, it's been interesting learning about V3. You know, especially like
Oh man,
it's just
it's
like
one of the
it's crazy, man.
it's an amazing work of financial genius on these guys' behalf. And Hayden, the guy that runs Uniswap, these guys, Uniswap only used to be ETH and DAI, like that's all it was, right? And now it has just become literally what I think is one of the most important financial contracts in the world today.
You know,
Um,
now that you're saying all this, like it's got me thinking like maybe we should try to build the same pool instead of trying to use the Pancake Swap app and Safe. Maybe we should try to use the Uniswap pool because Uniswap has exposure to BSC now too.
yeah, oh yeah, go check it out. Like Uniswap interface is phenomenal. I love it. In fact, I teach another class at and hopefully I'll be teaching it at UCI if Professor Dave Carlson has me back again. I was just there yesterday teaching a class on market making, right? Um, and so there's a class that I teach that takes all of about 30 minutes where I pull down the Uniswap exchange contracts and launch them on Solidity, or I'll use Tenderly actually to just deploy them. And then I take the whole entire front end from Uniswap and I'll customize it to look like my own thing and then deploy it to Cloudflare Worker. And I have my own decentralized exchange. That's it.
Then you have PJ
It takes all about 30 minutes. Yeah, PJ swap, right? So it's fun. It's not necessary for what we're trying to do. It's obviously a lot of overhead to maintain.
So you're
if you're
saying
trying to be
SPS
secure,
swap?
but I don't want
SPS swap's not coming.
I'm not doing it. Yeah, if somebody else wants to do it, go for it. Give it a shot.
Yeah,
But there's no point. I mean, you're not charging for any of the transactions. It's literally just a decentralized exchange, and you can tie it into the liquidity manager from the existing Uniswap pools so that you have instant liquidity on your new exchange. But you're not gonna. It doesn't make you any money, right? You'd have to build in market, some kind of market transaction service on top of it, which just doesn't make sense because Uniswap is already basically there's no race to the bottom. It's already at the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's something for me to think about with the treasurers too. Like maybe we should just start setting up these pools on Uniswap, even if they are on like BSC or some of the other EVMs in the future. But yeah, I think
they just expanded everything on here too. I'll pull up Uniswap.
Yeah, I think the first thing is just communicating this stuff to the DAO, getting them to understand like the benefits of spreading out liquidity and essentially getting these arbitrage opportunities going, getting access to payment providers, which creates more arbitrage and creates more gateways for funds into the game. And of course, like talking about contingency plans, if we ever do get to a position where the DAO has to like basically own and operate the game, you're gonna want payment processors that are already like tapped into SPS chain and like are tapped into these EVMs that can move in and out of SPS chain.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And yeah, I'm looking at Uniswap right now. It's got Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, Base, BNB, Avalanche, Cello, Blast, Zora, and ZK Sync. So
I want to look into ZK Sync some more, man. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about that one, but what are your
ZK
thoughts?
Snarks, right? Zero knowledge proofs.
Man,
I haven't
remember,
done anything on ZK Sync, but
dude, I can remember. What was the first one that was using ZK?
ZK Snarks.
Yeah, like what was the first coin? Like I remember whenever they first started mining it.
I mean,
Zcash. Zcash.
Yeah, Zcash. Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah, dude, that was the only time I ever bought a cloud mining contract, and it was profitable.
Really?
Like, yeah, so like that first day, it was so hyped that like the first day, I think I got like 0.04 of like a Zcash, and it paid off the mining contract. So I was just like, whatever. But that's the only time I tried cloud mining. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it's all fun and games from here on out. Yeah, and I've done a lot in concentrated liquidity. So like we built a bot that managed concentrated liquidity across different tokens, and we made a lot of money doing it. Although I don't operate it anymore, I really don't do too much of that anymore, just because it is time consuming, and it is highly profitable if you know what you're doing. I had days doing concentrated liquidity on coins like NFT Worlds when it first came out, where I had like a $17,000 position and I was making 17 grand a day on that position in a 1% pool. So I was doubling my money every single day. And what was crazy was they had airdropped the tokens to me for NFT Worlds, and I didn't have to pay. Well, obviously we owned some NFT Worlds NFTs. The amount that they airdropped us and went and made liquidity positions on, I was the first person to set up the V3 pool, and I set up I believe it was a USDC/ETH pool. And I can't remember if it was on ETH or Polygon. I'd have to look at my NFTs that I have from Uniswap V3. But yeah, I was making literally 100% every single day on the position for like a week.
See, this
Crazy.
is the stuff that we want our communities to have access to, right? Like we want our communities to be
Yeah,
able to
there's a
like
lot of
go
risk.
and
There's risk. There's risk doing concentrated liquidity because you can get knocked out of your position and end up holding a bunch of shitcoin that you don't want to hold, right? Because people will make, they'll pair it with like Pepe coin and other stuff, right? So you have to be careful because, as the position moves out of range, once you're out of range, you're basically locked at the price of the lowest portion of the range that you're at, with the least of the lesser of the valuable token. And if it goes up above your range, you're basically holding on to a majority of the lesser valued token, right? So you have to be careful. They do offer full range pools, which is basically Uniswap V2, which is the most common type of pool. But if you're fairly certain that the range of the token is going to stay consistent, then you can start to tighten in your liquidity restraints or constraints in your position, and you'll earn higher and higher fees because more and more of your liquidity is being used within that target range, right? Yeah, and so you do have to be careful. There is a ton of resources that you can use in order to look at estimated earnings over the last 24 hours for particular Uniswap V3 positions. It takes, it's a far more complicated process than just putting money into a pool, right? And there are a lot of tricks where you can actually create pools with only one token and not have to provide any liquidity for the second token, as long as people are willing to buy it at the new adjusted market price that you set. So you can actually create these pools with only a single token. It's called a single-sided position, basically, or more like we would call a sell order on a traditional order book, right? That you can set up. It's pretty darn cool. I'm not gonna lie. A lot of people, I think, even at Splinterlands, were like, you can't do that, and I was like, hell yeah, you can. Watch me do it, right? So yeah, it's again, these are just options. This isn't anything that's going into effect. This has to be something that would be a DAO proposition. I think it would behoove us to actually look into how to do this because it broadens our ability, like I'll say again, to provide fiat on-ramps and to create markets in a single format contract. I mean, we only need one contract in order to get it available on multiple chains, and then each of those chains has its own markets that we can go after. It's a great marketing opportunity because a lot of these chains would be happy to have Splinterlands start moving liquidity over to those chains. So it creates great narratives and social currency. It's things that people can go and talk about. And I know we have a lot of great, like I was on the People's Guild the other day, absolutely loved it. Didn't go into too much of this stuff with them, but like I said, I teach a 2-hour class on this. So it takes a little bit of time to go through, and I would be happy to speak more on this topic and try to educate people about how this stuff works. I think it's really important. I would love, to see more guilds actually get involved and start to rally around this as well, because we as a community should be thinking about these types of things and considering these things. And there are people in our community who are actually probably professional fund managers that know how this stuff works, and are professional traders that love the game and the ecosystem that could help us. So with that being said, it is a tremendous opportunity. Nothing that we have to force people to do by any means, but I would hope that people would start to consider it. And it's something that's scalable too. We can scale into these positions relatively easily. Once you have one set up, it's pretty straightforward for the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most important thing is like basically educating the DAO on how to make like what I would say is like common sense DeFi, right? Like instead of with the white paper and everything originally, like we had it set up to where we're just like we're paying people, we're doing liquidity mining, which is like I feel like that was like V1, like very outdated version of what DeFi started out as, where you're just like essentially you're paying people to put liquidity into a pool and build your markets for you. But the problem with that is whenever you stop paying them, that liquidity leaves. And in the instance of something like I think to some extent, we're still feeling a little bit of the pain of the major cuts we did to the DeFi inflation recently. Is like part of the problem is too, like the people that are farming your tokens, if they're not outright selling them, immediately, then like what's going to happen is like when you stop paying them, they're just hoarding all these tokens to sell at some point in the future. And I mean, like, there's people that want to like make the argument that not everybody does that, but like, okay, but in general, like if that's your target audience and that's how you're incentivizing it, like that's what you get. And I think we need to stop just printing tokens to rent liquidity that we're not even using, and we need to start being more strategic with how we deploy liquidity and make it work for the DAO.
Can I just kind of go off on a small little tangent here, because I just started looking at the town hall commentary about Hive, right? Although I know the number of people working on Hive is limited right now, I think there's like 6 or 8 engineers that have committed in the last couple months towards the Hive project. Doesn't matter, right? Splinterlands has already proven the fact that Hive is a successful operating chain for the use case that it has, right? The one thing we don't have is cohesion between Splinterlands and Hive. And I know that there's a lot of drama that goes back and forth between people that are, vocal points here at Splinterlands and people that are a part of the Hive project. I kind of hate that, to be honest. And I really hate using this phrase, but a rising tide rises all ships, right? Or however it is, but
we're all going to the same moon. Is that what you're saying, PJ?
Well, it just doesn't make sense for there to be any at odds with each other. We've had many threats where people are like, "Oh, well, we'll just fork Hive and run our own stuff," and I've have fallen victim to being a part of those conversations and narratives. But it's nothing we want to do. We don't want to manage our own chain. It comes with a whole other set of security risks right now that I've, although it's been thrown around as a notion, it's not really something that, it seems pretty easy, but it's not. And I really think that this is one of those opportunities where, besides all the drama behind the scenes with Hive and, all the things that are going on Peaky, I don't really care, to be honest. I think this is a great opportunity for both of us, or when I say both of us, us and them, right? And it shouldn't be us versus them. It should be us with them, right? It just makes sense because it's more optionality for markets to be made. And really, when it comes down to markets, it's just brass tacks, value, right? And Hive has a lot of value and we have a lot of value. And the more and more that we bicker back and forth about this dumb shit isn't going to help anybody, right? What we ought to do is get some cohesion finally, come together on a single point and try to do this together. And then all of a sudden it becomes much easier. We've literally doubled the amount of effort that we have going towards these things. And that just makes it so much easier for all of us, right? So I've even, I've reached out on like the Hive dev channel and stuff. I don't think many people know who I am, and I don't have a whole lot of weight in Hive because I really have zero involvement on that end, other than just operating Hive nodes and reading all of the documentation for Hive and watching the GitHub commits. I'm not involved in the Hive community at all. I don't have any. I used to have posts on the original Steemit blog, but I haven't posted anything on Hive at all. But I know that some people in our community do, right? And I'm hoping that we as a community could just get over the contemplation and all of the bickering, because it's really childish at the end of the day. It's a game, right? We're a game. They're a network. There's a lot of value tied in here. We need to start figuring these things out and working cohesively. I see that we didn't get the proposal to pass from Hive, which sucks because I'd figure, they would want to see us succeed. And if they have a ton of liquidity that's just laying around, then it would make sense for them to reinvest back into their ecosystem. But that's how they feel. And I'm hoping that we can kind of close that gap. It just doesn't make sense to me why we would even be at odds about something like this. I'm pretty sure Splinterlands has also provided a lot of value to Hive, right? And a lot of value to all the other market providers out there. And there's a lot of bickering about who should get what and who should do what. These things that we're talking about right now are, could easily be a joint effort and something that is just it's the same process for all of us, regardless, making liquidity, extending markets, trying to get fiat on ramps. Those are all common aligned goals that we have with them. The only other thing that I could see being a problem is people's personal agendas that own exchanges on Hive, because they know it's going to take away from their current market volume. But if you think about it in the broader concept, it will actually make those exchanges also more valuable, because now you're going to have more transaction fees and tokens that are worth more money being transacted across multiple markets, bridging back and forth, and trying to take advantage of arbitrage opportunities based on where the token prices are. So I don't know if anybody here has any pull over there. I obviously have little to no pull whatsoever, but I think that conversation is one that we should have. It's worth having. And I also think it's one of those things that we could actually get along on really easily, right? Call me crazy. I don't know the community. I don't know how people react, but to me, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. And this is one of those use cases where it lines up pretty well. And it would be very easy for both communities to be a part of that. And to get more exposure, it would be, in my eyes, a really great opportunity for both communities.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I was actually in the Hive Dev Discord server the other day because I'm trying to get some clarification about the Hive multisig shit. It's basically like locked to a 1 hour time limit, and I'm telling them that they need to do something about that. But like so apparently like Transact went down and like nobody knew what to do. And like I had to go in and
there's
tell
no
them
contingency
like,
plan.
well,
no contingency.
it's like I had to go in because no like PJ they don't have any contacts with Transact. Like it's literally Splinterland set all that up. So it's like I had to go in there and tell them that like the Splinterlands team got Transact back up, so like it's good to go now. And they were like, oh, we didn't know who to talk to. And just like it's stuff like this. Like I think that like when people fail to realize just like how mutually beneficial Splinterlands is for Hive and Hive is for Splinterlands, it frustrates me, right? It's like this us and them divide. It's like, dude, like we're all us.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
There's this us and there's that us, but it's all still us. Like we don't win by we don't win by like cutting off our arm, just to be like to flip them off with like the arm we cut off. It's just like we have to figure out how to work together, and right now it's
like I said, it becomes a narrative that is a positive sentiment narrative. And it's something where again, I know there's some personalities that are involved that do some pretty atrocious things from time to time. And there are some movers and shakers, and there's a lot of whales in the Splinterlands community that are at any point in time questioning things on both ends, right? But these types of things create a lot of alignment, and they're these types of projects that have really just a horizon to them. You know what you got to do. You know what is involved, right? There's literally a playbook that I have for launching EVM markets, right, that I could share. And it's very straightforward, right? And as long as we're talking and working with each other, it doesn't necessarily, they're not going to necessarily need to know what's going on with Splinterlands, and we're not. I mean, actually, Splinterlands has to be very involved in watching what's happening on Hive because we depend on their infrastructure, not the other way around. I would say that Splinterlands does provide a lot of value for Hive, right, and a use case for it. And at any point in time, like chains often only have a core team of people that are really doing the contribution to the chain. And you have a lot of committers that are coming in and adding things. And then obviously through usage, you have a lot of either pull requests or issue requests that come through in the repository management of the code. There's cohesion there as well. But when it comes to the market making thing, that's the only part that the community can really be involved in, where you have cohesion between the people that are actually providing value. When I mean value, they're asset holders in either Splinterlands or Hive. And we, as a group, should be trying to work as cohesively with our chain provider as much as possible. So again, I would just say if anybody from Hive is listening, like I would beg you guys to consider doing this with us as well.
Well, I know we're over the 2 hour mark now, and you know,
Oh,
I
snap.
think hopefully everybody got a better idea of what's going on with validators, and you know, then we spent quite a while talking about the you know, the DeFi situation and how we should be, you know, adjusting our strategy and modernizing it to actually work for the DAO. And you know, I think we've got some good groundwork to build off of there. I can make some proposals. We can get contracts deployed. You know, we'll see what people want to do. You know, if people want to vote to do the thing, then we'll get it done. And you know, if they don't, then I guess you know, it is what it is. But you know, I think we have some good potential there. And yeah, you know, interested to see how things go.
Yeah, I appreciate you very much, Clay, as always. It's a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you, everybody else that was listening in. I really appreciate it. I don't do much public speaking here, but hopefully this will instill a little bit more confidence in me as a central part of the technology team here at Splinterlands. So thank you very much, Clay.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys, and everybody have a fun weekend. Hopefully, later.
All right, take care.